Welcome to the All About You podcast. My name is Sheila and I am your host. In this podcast, I invite everyday people to tell their stories of their travels, passions, and what makes them happy. So if you have a story to tell, please contact me on allaboutyoupodcast@yahoo.com and let's tell your story. So now for today's conversation. Welcome to the All About You podcast. And my guest today is Cathy, and she lives on a sailing yacht. Cathy, welcome to the All About You podcast.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
So, Cathy, you live on a sailing yacht. There is obviously a story as to how that happened. Let's start right at the beginning then. How did you become the person that lives on a sailing yacht?
Okay, so I met my partner in Botswana in Southern Africa, and we moved together to East London in South Africa. There isn't a lot to do there, so we used to, on a Sunday, drive around. We always ended up at the harbour. And one particular Sunday, we got to the harbour, and there were two boats standing out on the harbour being worked on. One was being built, and the other was being painted. My partner disappeared for 2 hours to go and chat with them, and came back and said, "I'm going to build a yacht." So I said, okay, and that's how it started over 30 years ago. And after 8 years, he had finished the yacht so that we could launch it, and it's been my home ever since.
I mean, that is incredible on so many levels. Your partner had never owned a boat before?
He'd never sailed. He was from a landlocked country. So for him, it was about building a boat and creating something, because he is very creative. And for him, it was also a means of getting to America, because he had a dream of working in America on Caterpillar engines, because he did his apprenticeship on Caterpillar engines. And so that was his motivation. I was always keen to travel. I've always had itchy feet, and all I saw was that this would be an opportunity to travel. I didn't really think about the reality of sailing. Do you understand what I'm saying? It was more just a means of getting somewhere and doing stuff. Yeah, it was our home for a year before we actually sailed it. The sailing we don't particularly like that much, but it's been very good to us as a home and a way of getting around.
I mean, that is one heck of a project to take up, building a boat of any description.
For him, it wasn't that much of a challenge. I mean, it was something, I've probably never seen him happier, actually, as when he was actually creating that his baby, if you like, for want of a better word. And it's a work in progress. I mean, he's still kind of fiddling with it. He's always upgrading and adding things and changing things. So in many ways, the building of it was the easy part. The sailing was much more challenging.
Had either of you any sailing experience before you took to the water?
No, whilst he was building the boat, which took 8 years, we used to go to the local yacht club, and on the weekends we'd go for day sails. South Africa was quite a chauvinist country at the time, so I was confined to the galley to make sandwiches. I learned absolutely nothing about sailing. My partner got very, very seasick to start with. I think probably more because he was anxious than anything else. And so when we finally launched the boat, we decided that we would go up to Durban with crew, because we didn't feel confident enough to go on our own. So we were 6 altogether, myself and 5 men. And once again, I was confined to the galley. And we got to Durban, and it hadn't been a particularly good trip. A few things went wrong, and we weren't comfortable with having all these people on our boat. So when we got there, we said, well, if we can't do it on our own, we're not going to do it. And we decided never ever to have crew again. And so we left Durban for Madagascar on our shakedown cruise, and I still knew nothing. And it was like being thrown in at the deep end. But you learn. I mean, you have to. Your survival instincts and everything kick in, and you learn the hard way, but you learn really good lessons, and you kind of get through it. So since then, we've always sailed on our own.
I mean, that's incredible. I mean, you started sailing with a crew and then you decided, no, this is not for us. We're going to do it on our own. And as you say, you had been confined to the galley, so you really hadn't got any experience of sailing. I mean, you two are just so brave.
Well, with hindsight, it's probably something, if someone had told me this is what's going to happen, da-di-da-di-da, I would have never done it. Because we have had some pretty difficult experiences. But like I said, it's incredible how your survival instinct takes over and you get on with what you've got to do in order to get through a bad situation or whatever, and you survive and you learn. I don't think we're great sailors even now after nearly 30 years of sailing, and every day you go out, you meet with new circumstances and new conditions which you might, you haven't had experienced before, but you find a way and you survive. But you see, for my partner, he is very practical in everything and he can work things out, and he's very strong physically, whereas I'm small and not that strong physically. So if I help him morally, I'm moral support more than anything else, I think. I mean, of course, do overnight crossings and it's 3 hours on, 3 hours off, so I'm in the cockpit on my own for 3 hours. But if there's a problem, I call him and he'll come and help and we get through it together, sort of thing. And the rewards make it worthwhile. We've seen incredible places and had amazing experiences which we wouldn't otherwise have done. So you put behind you the difficult times and you appreciate what you've gained from it.
Can we talk about the day-to-day routine of living on a sailing yacht? I mean, how do you cope with the shopping, the cooking and the washing of clothes, etc.? How does that all work?
Good question. I have a twin tub, which is 2 buckets. And it does depend. It depends on the circumstances. For example, at the moment, because it's winter, we're in a marina. We have all the facilities we need. We plug into the electricity. I can use the laundrette if I want. I go shopping on my bicycle. But once we're actually away from the marina and we're sailing, so for example, we're going to do a crossing, which is going to take 2 weeks. Like, for example, when we left South Africa to go across to the Caribbean or Brazil to start with, we knew it would be 2 weeks before we could stop in St. Helena. So you obviously have to provision and calculate roughly what you're going to need and everything. You don't think about things like washing and laundry. So you go and provision. And the funny thing is, when we went to Madagascar, I kind of had things that we normally ate. But once you get sailing, you find that you crave certain foods and there's only certain things you want to eat. For example, my partner only wanted to eat pancakes. So I had to make him pancakes just about every time he wanted to eat. We started wanting sweet things like cookies or biscuits, which we don't normally eat, so I didn't have any. So when we finally got to Madagascar, we hunted high and low. We eventually found some cookies and we bought them and we sort of ate them. So we got back to South Africa and then we had to plan to go across the Atlantic. So remembering our experience, I bought a whole pile of sweet biscuits and cookies and things to go across. And blow me down, we didn't want any of those. And after 2 years, we still had a locker full of these things that we didn't eat. So it's difficult to actually work out what it is you're going to want. But so you just have to make do with what you've got. And of course, we used to catch a lot of fish. So we'd be eating fresh fish whenever we could. In the Mediterranean, that's not really happening, but in other parts of the world, we used to eat a lot of fresh fish and preserve a lot of fish. We only have a very small fridge, so it's not like you stock up your freezer full of stuff. I used to do a lot of preserving in Kilner jars or mason jars, so that I could just open a jar and heat it up, so that if the conditions were too bad to cook properly, we still had something decent to eat, that sort of thing. You take a lot of fruit that won't spoil, and then as you go around. You have to learn to take whatever's available in the place that you get to, which isn't what you would always necessarily eat, but you have to make do with what's there.
I mean, just listening to all the things that you have to consider when you are travelling by boat, you know, certain foods that you can't keep on boat, you can't just get off the boat and go to a shop and buy something. That's a load of logistics of keeping yourself fed and watered when you're on a crossing. It's just phenomenal. I mean, the organisation and the forethinking of where you're going and what might be available, what you have to take with you is amazing.
So, for example, a lot of people stress about eggs, because a lot of things, like if you're cooking, you use eggs or baking and things, and they don't keep terribly well, and you don't have many places to store eggs safely, you know, without them breaking and things. So in some places you can get powdered egg, which I never knew about before. It's like a dried egg, and it's not the same as having egg, but it will do if you haven't got anything else. So you learn to adapt. And like I said, you do often get it wrong. And when you're arriving in some places, you have to realise that they, for example, when arriving in New Zealand or Australia, which we did, both countries, they have very strict rules about what you can bring into the country, and a lot of the fresh stuff they won't allow you to keep. So you arrive in, for example, New Zealand, and the quarantine people come on board, and I can't remember what they call the officers, but they come and they check what you've got, and if there's anything that they feel might threaten their own agriculture industry, everything, then they dispose of it. So we knew that we wouldn't be able to arrive with popcorn, and we had a lot of popping corn. So the days before we arrived there, that's all we ate was popcorn, because I was determined not to throw any of it away. But and we had meat that I had preserved in bottles, which we had bought in South America, which in fact was allowed, but we couldn't prove that we had bought it there because I had cooked it and prepared it. It wasn't in a tin with a label. So all of that they took and ditched, because they were not 100% sure of where it had come from, and they were worried that it would be a risk to their country, their agriculture industry. So yeah, you have to be aware of things like that as well when you're arriving in different countries. It doesn't happen so much here, but certainly when you're travelling through the Pacific and that, a lot of the islands are very, very particular about what you have on board.
So Cathy, I don't suppose you get much free time on the boat, but how do you spend any free time you do have?
Well, if we're sailing and we're doing an ocean passage, then like I said, we have to do 3 hours on, 3 hours off. So that means someone's sleeping for 3 hours whilst the other is in the cockpit keeping a watch out. And because of that, that's basically all you're doing, really. I mean, I will sit and read while I'm watching, perhaps, or getting something to eat. But you find that you start getting very tired, so you're basically sleeping or sitting in the cockpit watching, and that basically is what your passage is all about. And for a long time, we hardly even see each other. It's quite strange, but that's the way it is. But once we get somewhere and we're at anchor, then again it will depend where we are. There was a time when, for example, when we got to Madagascar, we used to, my partner would get his spear gun and out, and we'd go off looking for dinner. Literally, we'd go and get some fish or crayfish or lobster or something like that, and go ashore and see what's available there. And that used to consume a lot of our time as well. Now that we're in the Mediterranean, of course, it's rather different. So I have a paddleboard. I go paddleboarding and I swim. My partner metal detects, so that takes up our time. So it really does depend where we are in the world, what we're actually doing, and whether we're actually on passage or whether we're just cruising around the islands and going from anchorage to anchorage. I mean, for example, if we're in the Balearics, we'd be going from one anchorage to another, and that would be taking up half the day just moving from one anchorage to another, and then we'd find a safe anchorage, and then we'd go ashore, see what there is, and have a look at the sites, if there are any sites and things like that. But if we were somewhere like Madagascar or the Bahamas or something, it'd be completely different because the situation there is different.
I mean, it sounds incredibly idyllic when you're talking about the Bahamas, the Caribbean, Madagascar. The travelling you are doing by living together on a boat is just phenomenal.
Well, it certainly has given us opportunities to see parts of the world which we probably otherwise wouldn't, and see different parts as well. I mean, parts that aren't that easily accessible to the average sort of tourist. So we have been very, very lucky in that respect. It's changing though now. When we started sort of 30 years ago, there weren't quite so many people in boats doing what we're doing, and the restrictions were less. We were freer to go and anchor where we wanted to and pretty much go and come. But now it's becoming more difficult, we think. There are a lot more regulations in terms of where you can anchor, how long you can anchor for, and things like that. So we feel very lucky that we've done what we've done when we did it. I think if we were to start the same adventure now, it would be quite different.
When somebody asks you where you live, you know, for legal purposes, do you have to have a legal address somewhere in the world?
That's an interesting question. When we first started, again, it was very different because the internet wasn't as it is now. And so I just had an address in the UK, and my parents forwarded anything that they thought was important to me if there was a time when we were going to be somewhere long enough to receive the things. And when we went to Madagascar, we left South Africa and we told everyone, friends and family, that we were going to Madagascar and that we would be back in roughly 3 to 4 months' time. And we didn't actually have any communication with anyone in all that time because we got to Madagascar and it was impossible to make international phone calls, or very difficult. And I sent postcards which arrived about a week before we actually got back. So for 3 months we'd gone and no one knew where we were, and it was a case of no news is good news as far as they were concerned. And I didn't know what was going on with my family and friends either, because we couldn't hear from them. But now, of course, with the internet, it's much easier and we keep in touch. So I have a mail forwarding address now, and everything is forwarded to me electronically, so it's much easier, and we stay I stay connected that way. And of course things like banking and everything you do online anyway, so it's not such an issue now. In terms of residence and everything, of course that is one of the complications. A lot of places you can't stay indefinitely, obviously. So for example, when we were in Southeast Asia, we were able to stay in Malaysia for 3 months, and after 3 months we'd leave. We could go to Thailand for 3 months and go back to Malaysia for 3 months. We weren't really legally resident anywhere, I suppose, in the sense of being a tax resident, because we were never anywhere long enough. But now that we've been in Spain for nearly 3 years, we've actually become resident. But that's quite exceptional, and it's partly because of COVID that we've been forced into that situation, I suppose. But yeah, it is funny. I mean, home is where the boat is, and that's all we think of, really, most of the time. I have British passport, I have a New Zealand passport, but I haven't lived in either of those countries for many years. So
I think we all sort of think, you know, if I win the lottery, I'm going to buy a yacht and sail around the world. I think, you know, most people have got that sort of dream, but it's not as simple as that unless you are basically going to hire a yacht and let everyone crew it and you just sit on board drinking your margaritas. It's very, very different. What do you think is going to happen in the future? Do you think you've got sort of a plan for the next 5 years? We're going to continue, or what's on your plan for the next couple of years?
Well, that's a very good question, because before the COVID sort of pretty much put a stop to us moving, we had thought that we would go back across the Atlantic to the Caribbean. We were there sort of 20 years ago, and when we got there, we had to work in order to finance what we were doing. So our concern all the time was finding work and being where there was opportunity work, which was fairly easy to do. We could get work and everything, but because that was our most important thing at the time, we didn't really have time to appreciate the islands and explore them as sort of tourists. So we'd like to go back now and have a look in a more relaxed sort of way without having to worry about working and things. So that was before COVID, and then with restrictions, we weren't able to actually leave. We could have done this year, but we weren't really ready. And now the engine's died, so we're having to rebuild the engine, and so we're at a place right now. We can't really do anything until the engine's fixed, which is a work in progress at the moment. And once that's done, I guess we will probably move on. I'd be happy to just say, okay, that's enough now. My partner's, I don't think he's ever going to feel that. So he wants to still keep moving. He gets restless very easily, and so yeah, we probably will carry on sailing a bit more. There's going to be a time when it becomes more difficult physically for us. We're not as strong as we used to be, so we do have to think about things like that. We have to think about being able to access healthcare, and so there will have to be a time when we say, okay, enough's enough, and decide to settle somewhere, but we haven't really worked out where and when.
Well, hopefully that's a few years away, and you can continue to sail around and visit these places. I mean, I guess when COVID hit, were you in a marina, or were you sailing the high seas?
No, we had actually just recently arrived in Spain from Turkey, and we planned to spend that winter in Spain and then go across the Atlantic. And of course, we were completely locked down. We couldn't even leave the municipality, much less go out to sea. And that's how then we realised that we would have to stay put. And then we thought, after having stayed there, we thought, well, we may as well have a look around here as well and go to the Balearics and do that. So the next season we went to the Balearics and then came back. And now the engine died, so that sort of forced the decision for us to stay. And I don't regret that. I mean, we really enjoyed what we've seen here, and COVID and the restrictions aren't very nice, but it means that we did stop and have a look around rather than just rushing off. So there's good has come out of it.
I mean, Cathy, have you just taken thousands and thousands of photographs of all the places you've been and the experiences you've had?
Yes, we've got lots and lots of photos. And again, that's something that's different because when we first started, I don't think there were digital cameras even. So we had to be very careful with what photos we took and getting them developed and everything. But now, of course, that's all changed as well. So we can take as many photos as we like. So I probably don't have as many photos as I would have wanted of places like Madagascar and that where we first started, because, as I said, we were limited to the number of photos there were on a roll and stuff like that. And now we tend to take photos all the time and then never look at them. So I've got piles of photos of everything. And in fact, one of my projects during this lockdown has been to try and sort them out and organise them and sort of edit them and get rid of the ones we don't need and everything, because I have got so many and I don't think we need quite that many.
So Cathy, have you kept a journal?
Actually, not really. Of course, when we started, I used to write to my parents regularly, postcards and aerograms, and they kept them all. And when I used to go back and visit them, they'd say, oh, you should have these are yours. And I'd say, no, you keep them. And I kind of regret now that I didn't take them off them and keep them, because they're lost now, they're gone. Because that, I think I was probably when I wrote to them, I probably wrote exactly what I was feeling at the time, giving my impression of things and how we were feeling, how we were faring, and those kind of feelings you sort of forget. So I do regret not having that. The photos tell one story, but they don't tell the emotions you're feeling and things like that. So we can look back through our photos and say, oh, yes, remember then when we were there, da-di-da-di-da. But it's not quite the same as those feelings that I wrote when I wrote to my parents. So, no, I don't have a journal, unfortunately.
Oh, it's such a shame you didn't keep hold of those letters, because that's something when you are back on dry land, you can look back and they'll hold good memories for you.
Yes. Well, good memories, and probably not so much the good memories, but just realise what we went through when we did start off. I think we've kind of forgotten a lot.
And I guess over the time, though, both of you have changed as people.
I presume we have, yes. I mean, the fact that we're still together says a lot, because you're in a very confined space for a long, long time, and if you don't get on, it's just not going to work. You can't go off and and blow off steam somewhere or anything like that. And you've got to rely on each other all the time. So I think we've really learned to be tolerant of each other, and we know. I think we know more about each other than we do ourselves, almost. Because you have to it really is teamwork, and if you can't work as a team, then that's when you're going to have accidents and there's going to be problems. You've got to learn to trust each other and to be able to rely on each other. So it's been difficult at times, but I think it's made us stronger people, definitely stronger individuals.
I think your story is absolutely incredible, and you talk about in a very sort of relaxed way, whereas I'm sitting here thinking, wow, you did this and you did that and you had to overcome this problem. It's incredible.
But at the time, you're not thinking, you're actually doing. So like I say, your instinct just kicks in. I mean, we've sat out a couple of hurricanes. We've had very bad weather. We've lost a mainsail. We've lost a head sail. We've had some really, really difficult times, and especially when we first started, we were green about the crickets. We got really, getting tired is the most difficult. You get very, very tired, and if there's bad weather, you have to keep manning the ship. But there was one occasion when we were both incredibly exhausted, and we just decided that we would have to put out a message to say that the ship was no longer under, there's an expression you use, but basically no one's attending. So we put out a message on the radio to say that we were basically not keeping a lookout anymore, and we both just sort of crashed for 3 or 4 hours. We were just so exhausted, and we were lucky. We hove to, and we drifted a bit, but we didn't actually have any problems, and we came through that. I think now there's a lot more traffic, but then there's more technology to help you. So we have now, I don't know if you're familiar with an AIS. It's a system where ships send out a signal which you can pick up without seeing them. It's far more sophisticated than radar and far more accurate. And so we can have an alarm, and we can know when there are vessels nearby, and then we can be looking for them. Whereas when we first started, it basically was just what we could see with the eye or hear on the radio. Like I said, there's more technology now to help you, but there is much more traffic too. So it sort of swings and roundabouts about how safe it is.
Cathy, if you were starting out again on this venture, what would you have done differently?
Well, first of all, I think we would have launched the boat sooner and gone off sooner. My partner was very particular about detail and everything. And with hindsight, we should have gone sooner and started sailing. and then we would have seen what works and what didn't work, and we could have started sooner. A lot of the details that he spent so much time and energy on weren't really necessary, and some things didn't work, and he's had to modify things, and we could have discovered that by starting off sooner. The journals, or like, I would have perhaps kept a journal. Otherwise, I don't think anything much different.
I just think your story is absolutely extraordinary. I know I'm personally not as brave to be able to do something like that. I get seasick quite easily. So the fact that your partner got seasick but just put it to one side and carried on, I think was amazing.
Yeah, well, when on our shakedown cruise, okay, so it was about 8 days to Madagascar we worked out. So for the first 3 days, he was really, really seasick. He couldn't eat, he couldn't drink, and that's when I learned to sail, because he wasn't able to help me very much. I think it was more anxiety than anything else that was causing his seasick, rather than motion sickness. He wasn't sure how strong I would be. He wasn't sure how strong the boat was. There were a lot of uncertainties. And after 3 days, I was very concerned that he hadn't eaten much, and we had bad weather. On the 4th day, the weather changed completely. And when the sun rose, we looked out and we were surrounded 360 degrees to the horizon by dolphins. It was the most incredible experience. I will never, ever forget it. And I looked at my partner, Terry, and I said, okay, so what are we going to do? Or rather, he looked at me and he said, are we going to carry on or should we go back? This is how little I knew about sailing. We'd had a rough 3 days getting to where we were, and I couldn't face the thought of going back that way. But of course, if we had gone back, the wind would have been completely different, and it would have been easy to go back because we'd have had the wind with us rather than against us. But that's how I was. I just didn't understand enough about sailing. So I said, no, we have to carry on. I'm not going back that way. So we carried on, and he got better because the weather got better and he was feeling more confident. And 4 days later, we were in Madagascar. But all that time, you don't stop and think, oh, what am I doing? Apart from when we ask that question, you're just so busy getting on with surviving. And you don't think, oh, I'm being really brave doing this or anything. You just do it. You do what you have to do. Or you would too. I'm sure most humans would, in fact, survive and get through it. And it's only when you put yourself in those circumstances that you realise that you can.
Well, Cathy, I think your story is remarkable. I really do. It's been an incredible conversation talking about living on a sailing yacht. I mean, it's just incredible. Cathy, thank you so much for being a guest on the All About You podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. And perhaps one day we'll come by Valencia and you can come and see our sailboat and we'll take you for a spin.
I hope you have enjoyed the conversation. Don't forget, if you have a story you would like to tell, please get in touch. My email address is allaboutyoupodcast@yahoo.com, and thank you for listening.